If you're a regular here at the Kermode Uncut site, you'll know that a couple of weeks ago I posted a blog about Sam Raimi's new movie, Drag Me to Hell, which is a really good, fun horror film. And I was talking about the fuss that had surrounded Raimi's debut feature, The Evil Dead, which was caught up in the video nasty scare, great moral panic. It was prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act, and it took several years and fights to get that film released uncut here in the UK. And there is a tradition in the UK of blaming horror movies for crimes, which has often led to increased censorship. Now, at the end of last week, just such a story appeared to break. News was coming from court proceedings about the murder of a 17-year-old man who was tied to a tree and burned to death. And it was suggested in court that somehow this murder had been inspired by the British spoof horror film Severance. And I was on air on Radio 5 when this story broke, and I was asked to comment on it. And I said, well, look, I don't know the details of the case, but I'm always deeply suspicious of anything which ties horror movies to violent crimes or uses horror movies to explain violent crimes. Of course, the story was picked up by the press. So in the Mirror, we had a story which said that the crime was inspired by a scene in the horror spoof Severance. In the Times, they said it was a gruesome recreation of a scene from a horror film. And the Press Association reported it by saying that the idea for the murder came from the spoof horror film Severance. What's interesting is this. I thought at the time, here we go again. We're going to have another moral panic, we're going to have another campaign against horror movies in much the same way that we've seen time and time again. Those of you old enough to remember what happened in the wake of the Jamie Bulger case, when Child's Play 3 was somehow chosen as the movie to be picketed. And such was the outrage that we actually had an amendment to the Criminal Justice Act, which caused a real clampdown on film censorship in the early to mid-90s. What's fascinating, and I have to say encouraging, is this. I'm recording this blog now on Tuesday, and so far, despite those early news stories, this panic hasn't happened. I was on the phone this morning to the British Board of Film Classification to ask them whether they had been inundated with phone calls from the tabloid press. I mean, it seems like such a gift to the tabloids. Horror movie inspires hideous crime. But they said no, it hasn't happened. Now, I may be being preemptively optimistic, and it may be that by the time you watch this blog, some ban these video nasty story has broken. But on the evidence so far, it seems to me that the tide has genuinely changed. That for perhaps the first time, when faced with a genuinely hideous crime and the possibility of blaming a horror film, the British press have decided that no, that's just a sideshow. The real story lies somewhere else. And on that evidence, we may finally have grown up.